isn't it time that Rishi Sunak and this country just decided to make its own decisions, that he decided to make the decisions for Britain that will solve our own migrant crisis?
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because the European Union is not any conduit for a solution to this problem. The European Union is part of the problem. And the reason I say that is because the EU fundamentally believes in nation states being abolished. That's why they've got the Schengen zone. That's why they want to have a borderless Europe. They want to have what they call a United States of Europe. But actually what they're seeking is a complete coalescing of Europe into one entity. So migration across Europe for them is not an issue. And if you want to undermine a nation state, what better way to do it? What better way to get rid of national culture, history, heritage, and all of that than to have immigration? It helps the EU for nation state cultures and their people to be devalued, if you like, by unbridled migration. The EU can never be a solution to this problem. The EU is part of the problem. And the only solution to this problem is nation states taking it upon themselves to enforce their borders. That's why we call it border control. It's about controlling your borders. It's not about deporting people who enter your country illegally. That may be what you need to do if border control is not working. But you have to exercise unilateral border control. Italy needs to take a leaf out of the Australian playbook. It needs to send out its Navy, its Coast Guard. It needs to stop these boats in the Mediterranean, board them if necessary, take control of those boats, and sail them straight back to where they came from. And we similarly, as an independent sovereign nation, need to stop the dinghies in the channel and turn them back to France. And if we all did this as independent nation states, you wouldn't need cooperation because you'd stop the flow of people overnight. And the idea, just before viewers watching me saying what I'm saying, roll their eyes in disbelief because people in dinghies may suddenly jump out and drown in the channel. Belgium, which is a country that also has boats leaving its shores, intercepts them in the sea, and it turns back successfully 90% of all launching. The French, by their own reckoning, and I'm doubtful about their numbers, turn back 45%, and we're giving them $500 million. There's no solution to this problem through multilateral or bilateral agreement. Nation states evolved over thousands of years with borders for a reason, and we need to protect those borders. We need border control. That is a physical process. It's not a legislative one. It's a physical protection of our borders that is needed right across Europe.
They always are very keen to stress the European Convention on Human Rights is not the EU. It's nothing to do with the EU. I say there's a kind of umbilical attachment there. They are sort of part and parcel of the European project. Now, we're in the European Convention on Human Rights. Rishi's Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has made it quite clear that it's time that we left the ECHR so that we can make our own decisions and not be thwarted by the European Court on Human Rights, just as we were a couple of years back now when we tried to fly migrants to Rwanda and they ordered us to keep the plane on the ground, and they still haven't managed to get anyone to Rwanda. Also, his business secretary, Kemi Badenoch, says we've got to leave the ECHR. Why do you think the Prime Minister himself doesn't want to leave the ECHR?
Well, I don't think they've got the political courage to do it. If they had the requisite political courage to actually govern the country as an independent sovereign state, they would have stopped the boats using the British Navy years ago. This wouldn't be a problem. The ECHR, just before we get onto the ECHR in detail, just to make the point that the European Union is not a member of the European Convention of Human Rights.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot about that.
Which is really interesting. And they're not a member because they refuse to have the European Court of Justice, which is their own court in the European Union, their own court to be subjugated to the ECHR. But here we are, the United Kingdom, a country that actually established international human rights way before other countries had even conceived of the notion. Here we are, subjugating our Supreme Court to an unelected bunch of people who make up the law on the hoof, often against British national interest, against parliamentary will, and we don't have a government that's courageous enough either to ignore their rulings or to leave the convention. And actually, we should leave the convention. Suella's absolutely right to say we should leave it. It's gone way beyond what it was when it was set up, I think, in 1946.